It started on an ordinary Thursday. I had just come home from work, tired but content, looking forward to a quiet evening with my wife. We had been married for 8 years. 8 years of ups, downs, and all the in-betweens that came with a life built together. I thought I knew her, every piece of her. I thought I had the kind of marriage others envied. Her phone was on the counter, ringing. She was in the shower, so I thought, why not pick up? The caller ID was unfamiliar, a simple word contact. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear as I rinsed a dish in the sink. There was a pause on the other end. Then, a man's voice, smooth and intimate, broke through. "Hey, baby, I've been thinking about you all day. Did you like the flowers?" I froze. The plate slipped from my hands and clattered into the sink. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My mind raced to make sense of it. Baby? Flowers? What the hell was this? The voice grew concerned. "You there?" I silently hung up, my hand trembling as I placed the phone back on the counter like it was something toxic. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't even know what to feel. Shock? Betrayal? Anger? Instead, I chose calm, at least on the surface. When she came out of the bathroom, toweling her hair dry, I smiled and handed her the phone. "You missed a call," I said casually. She glanced at it but didn't seem worried. She didn't even check the recent calls log, just shrugged and said, "Probably spam." That night, as I lay beside her in bed, her breathing soft, and even as she slept, I stared at the ceiling. My mind replayed the voice, the words, over and over. Something didn't sit right. The truth, I realized, was likely darker than I was willing to admit. So I decided I wouldn't admit it. Not to her. Not yet. Instead, I would watch, listen, pretend to be the husband she believed was clueless. And when I uncovered the truth, I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. I'd plan my revenge. The next day, I decided I wouldn't let her know that anything had changed. I made her breakfast before she woke up, scrambled eggs with spinach, her favorite. I kissed her forehead as she sipped her coffee, and she looked at me like I was a blessing she didn't deserve. The irony stung, but I didn't flinch. "I was thinking," I said as I buttered toast for myself, "we should have a date night soon. It's been a while." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. If I hadn't been watching her so closely, I wouldn't have noticed it. "Oh, that sounds nice," she said, smiling. "But maybe next week? Work's been crazy." Work? A convenient excuse. My mind returned to the voice on the phone, the man who had called her baby. Was he someone from her office? A client? Or was work just a cover for something else entirely? I nodded. Next week sounds perfect. But I wasn't going to wait until next week to learn more. That night, while she slept, I carefully picked up her phone and unlocked it. We had always shared our passwords, an unspoken agreement that neither of us had anything to hide. I couldn't help but notice that her messages were spotless. Too spotless. No recent texts from anyone suspicious. No calls in her log from the number I had answered. She's deleting things, I thought. She's careful, but not careful enough. I downloaded an app onto her phone that mirrored her messages and call logs to my own device in real time. If she sent or received anything, I would know. She was about to learn that her perfect husband had a dark side she never saw coming. In the days that followed, I played my role perfectly. I cooked her dinner, left sweet notes in her bag, and even surprised her with flowers at work. She gushed to me about how thoughtful I was. But I also started watching her every move. Her showers were longer than usual, and she started leaving the room to take calls. She smiled at her phone in ways she hadn't smiled at me in months. My phone buzzed quietly every time she received a text, and I read every one as if my life depended on it. Then I saw it, a message from a contact saved under the name Erica. I knew it wasn't Erica. "Miss you already," it said. Her response came quickly. "I miss you too. Can't wait for Saturday." I felt a cold rage building inside me. Saturday? I was scheduled to be out of town for work that day. Coincidence? No. I had my confirmation, but I didn't react. Not yet. I had a better idea. I was going to let her think she had the upper hand, Let her sink deeper into this web she was weaving. By the time I was done, she wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose everything. The plan was forming. By the time Saturday rolled around, I was ready. I kissed her goodbye that morning, suitcase in hand, and pretended I was leaving for the work trip. "I'll miss you," I said, looking deep into her eyes. She smiled, a little too brightly. "I'll miss you too. Drive safe." Her words felt like venom disguised as honey. As soon as I was out of sight, I parked around the corner and waited. It didn't take long. Within an hour, she emerged from the house, dressed far too nicely for someone who had claimed she'd be spending the day catching up on laundry and reading. She got in her car and drove off. I followed from a distance, heart pounding in my chest. The adrenaline was intoxicating. She had no idea that the perfect husband she thought she was deceiving had transformed into her silent shadow. She pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel on the other side of town. My jaw clenched as I watched her get out of the car, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the window. Moments later, a man approached her, a tall, well-dressed guy with a cocky air about him. He greeted her with a kiss. Not a friendly one, a kiss that made my blood boil. I took out my phone and started recording. Every second, every move. This wasn't just for me anymore. This was evidence. Evidence I would use to expose her lies to everyone. Her friends, her family, even the people she worked with. I stayed in my car as they walked into the hotel together, laughing like teenagers sneaking around. It was almost laughable how careless they were, but I didn't dwell on it. I had what I needed. The rest of the day, I waited for her to return home, pretending to be none the wiser. When I finally walked through the door that evening, suitcase in hand, she greeted me with a hug and a glass of wine. "How was your trip?" she asked, her tone so casual, so rehearsed. "Exhausting, elite. Glad to be home." We sat on the couch together, watching TV, her head resting on my shoulder like everything was fine. But as she scrolled through her phone, smiling at whatever message she'd just received, I was already planning my next move. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted her humiliation to be absolute, and I knew exactly how to make it happen. Next, I'd set the trap and make sure both her and her lover walked right into it. The next few days were a whirlwind of careful plotting. My mind raced, filled with ideas on how to unravel the image she so carefully maintained. She wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose the respect of everyone she counted on. The first step was subtle but crucial, planting seeds of doubt among our mutual friends. I invited her closest friends over for a small gathering. Something low-key, just drinks and snacks, under the guise of reconnecting. I played the role of the doting husband perfectly, pouring wine, cracking jokes, and casually mentioning how distant she'd been lately. I spoke just enough to make them curious without outright accusing her. I needed them to question her actions on their own. "She's been working late a lot," I said, feigning concern. "I think she's stressed. I just want to make sure she's okay." Her friends nodded sympathetically, but I saw the flicker of curiosity in their eyes. A flicker I knew would grow. After they left, I moved to phase 2, baiting her lover. I'd already confirmed his number from the text she sent and received. Now it was time to use it. From a burner phone, I sent a message posing as her. "Can't stop thinking about you. Same time next week." His response came almost immediately. "Of course. Can't wait to see you again." Disgust welled up inside me, but I pushed it down. His eagerness was exactly what I needed. I waited a few days before accidentally bringing up the topic of our mutual friends to her. Over dinner, I casually mentioned how a few of them had been asking about us lately. "They think we're the perfect couple," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "Well, we are, aren't we?" I didn't respond. I just smiled back and took another sip of my drink. Behind the scenes, I reached out to one of her friends, the one most likely to talk. I dropped a few subtle hints about how off things had been between us lately, how I suspected something was wrong. She was intrigued, maybe even concerned. Perfect. By the end of the week, my plan was in motion. Her lover was primed, her friends were suspicious, and she remained blissfully unaware that her perfect world was beginning to crumble. The next step would be the grand reveal, a public reckoning that would leave her with nowhere to hide. By now, my plan was a living, breathing entity. Every word I said, every move I made, was calculated to keep her off balance while I orchestrated her downfall. The day of the reveal was drawing closer, and I couldn't afford a single mistake. To set the stage, I decided to involve her closest friends and the man she thought she was sneaking around with. It was time to show everyone the truth, and I wanted her lies to unravel in real time. The opportunity came when one of our mutual friends, Lily, suggested a small dinner party at our house. Just a close group, she said. It'll be fun. Perfect. I volunteered to host and insisted on handling the guest list. My wife was delighted. She probably thought it was my way of keeping up appearances. She had no idea I was inviting her lover, under the guise of it being a casual gathering of friends. I sent him a message from the burner phone, pretending to be her. Come over Saturday night. Just a small group, but I need to see you. His response? Wouldn't miss it. The stage was set. The night arrived, and I played the gracious host to perfection. My wife flitted around the house, laughing with her friends, pouring wine, acting like she hadn't spent the past few weeks lying through her teeth. I watched her like a predator watches its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then he showed up. He walked in, casual as you like, with a smug grin plastered across his face. He probably thought he was clever, that no one knew. My wife froze for a moment when she saw him, but she quickly recovered, flashing him a tight, awkward smile. She glanced at me, probably to gauge if I noticed anything. I made sure to look oblivious, welcoming him like he was any other guest. Great to see you, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, cocky. I wanted to crush it, but I smiled instead. The evening went on, tension simmering beneath the surface. I watched them carefully, noting every subtle glance they exchanged, every second they spent avoiding each other to keep up appearances. Her friends were none the wiser, for now, but the real fireworks began after dinner, when everyone was seated in the living room. Glasses of wine clinked, laughter echoed, and I decided it was time. I stood up, glass in hand, and cleared my throat. I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you being here tonight. It means a lot. Everyone smiled and murmured their agreement, lifting their glasses for a toast. My wife looked up at me, her face glowing with what I knew was false pride. I smiled back at her, a predator savoring its prey. There's something I've been meaning to share, I continued, keeping my tone light and casual. Something that's been on my mind for a while. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My wife's smile faltered ever so slightly. I've been keeping a little project of my own, I said, tapping the screen to bring up the video I had recorded of her and her lover at the hotel. I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share it. The room went silent. My wife's face drained of color as I held the phone up for everyone to see. The video played, her betrayal laid bare in front of everyone she cared about. Gasps filled the room. Her friends looked at her in shock, horror, and disgust. Her lover shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence crumbling. What the hell is this? One of her friends demanded. My wife stammered, trying to explain, trying to deny it. But the evidence was there, undeniable. I think it's clear, I said, my voice calm but cutting. The perfect wife isn't so perfect after all. The fallout was instant and devastating. Friends turned on her. The room descended into chaos. And as she sat there, crumbling under the weight of her own lies, I felt nothing but satisfaction. This was just the beginning. The room erupted in chaos, just as I had expected. Accusations flew, and her friends, the ones who had idolized her, defended her, and called her the perfect wife, were now turning on her. How could you do this? One of her closest friends, Lily, demanded, her voice trembling with anger. To him? To all of us? My wife, no, my soon-to-be ex-wife, looked like a trapped animal. Her face was pale, her mouth opening and closing as she scrambled for something to say. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, but no one believed her. Not anymore. Her lover, who had been slouching in his seat, suddenly stood up. "This is bullshit," he muttered, as if that would erase the video evidence. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I said, my voice calm, measured. I stepped closer to him, towering over him as I pointed to my phone. "You've been sneaking around with my wife behind my back for months. You're lucky I haven't knocked your teeth out." He had no response to that. He just looked away, his confidence reduced to rubble. "You should leave," one of her friends said, glaring at him. "Now." He hesitated, glancing at my wife as if waiting for her to defend him. She didn't. She couldn't. With a muttered curse, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. My wife sat on the couch, her head in her hands, shaking as the weight of her humiliation pressed down on her. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her crumble. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low and steady. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." She looked up at me, her eyes red and filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but her apology felt hollow. Empty. Too late. "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught." Her friends began to file out one by one, murmuring their disgust as they left. None of them looked at her. None of them offered her comfort. By the time the door closed behind the last one, it was just the two of us. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I cut her off. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door or burning dinner. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. 1,000 choices, over and over again." She sobbed, but I felt no sympathy. "Not anymore. I'm done," I said, turning toward the stairs. "You can sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, I'll start the paperwork for the divorce." She gasped. "No, please, we can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said without looking back. "We're over." I walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the ruins of the life she had destroyed. But I wasn't done yet. Tomorrow I had plans to make, plans to ensure that when I walked away, I wouldn't just leave her behind. I'd leave her with nothing. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I didn't hear her usual routine. No coffee brewing, no soft hum of music from the kitchen. When I came downstairs, she was sitting at the table, her eyes red and puffy from crying all night. She looked at me, but I ignored her. I wasn't interested in whatever excuse she had crafted overnight. I had bigger things to do. First, I called my lawyer. I had already been gathering evidence, but now it was time to lay it all out. The video, the texts I had mirrored to my phone, even the bank statement showing a suspicious charge for a hotel room. Everything would be part of the case. I wanted this divorce to be swift and devastating. By mid-morning, I was packing my things into a suitcase. She stood in the doorway, watching, her voice trembling as she asked, "Where are you going?" "To my parents' house," I replied coldly. "I need space." "You can't just leave," she said, stepping closer. "We need to talk about this." I stopped what I was doing and turned to face her. "There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choices, and now you can live with them." Her face crumpled, and she reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said sharply. "You don't get to play the victim here." As I zipped up my bag, my phone buzzed. It was Lily. She had sent a message. "We're here for you. Let us know if you need anything." Her support was surprising but welcome. Word had clearly spread among our friends, and the fallout was already building. Before I left, I turned to her one last time. "You should probably call your parents," I said. "They'll hear about this soon enough." Her eyes widened in panic. "You told them?" "Not yet," I said, shouldering my bag. "But I will. And don't worry, I'll make sure they see the video too." She sank into the chair, her head in her hands, as I walked out the door. At my parents' house, I explained everything. My mom was furious. Not at me, but at her. "I never liked her," she said, shaking her head. "You deserve better." My dad, always the calm voice of reason, said, "Focus on protecting yourself, son. Don't let her take anything that's yours." He was right. The next few days were a blur of meetings with my lawyer, calls with friends who offered their support, and carefully strategizing my next steps. I wasn't just divorcing her. I was dismantling the life we had built together. Meanwhile, her world was falling apart. Our mutual friends had turned on her, and her reputation was in shambles. Lily told me she had tried to reach out to a few of them, but no one wanted to hear her excuses. Even her family was struggling to defend her. Then came the final blow. I posted the video online. Not publicly, but in a private group of our closest friends and family. My caption was simple: "This is why we're getting divorced." The fallout was immediate. Texts and calls flooded in from people who had been unaware of the situation, all offering their support to me and their shock at her behavior. Her parents called me, begging to know what had happened, and I told them everything. I didn't hold back. "She's ruined this marriage," I said, "and she's going to face the consequences." By the end of the week, she was utterly isolated. Her lover didn't want anything to do with her after the exposure, and her friends had abandoned her. She was left with nothing but the wreckage of her lies. And I was just getting started. As the days passed, I realized that my methodical takedown of her life wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure. Every step I took to dismantle the image she had built was a step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my peace. After the private video release, I shifted gears. It was time to finalize the divorce strategy. I met with my lawyer and laid everything out. "I don't just want this over," I told him. "I want it airtight. I don't want her to get a dime she doesn't deserve." He nodded, flipping through the stack of evidence I had provided. "With this, you're in a strong position. She won't have much room to argue." That evening, I sent her a message. "We need to discuss the divorce terms. I'll be by tomorrow afternoon." I knew she was reeling. Her friends weren't speaking to her. Her lover had disappeared, and her family was barely holding it together after seeing the video. She was utterly alone, and that's exactly how I wanted her to feel. When I arrived at the house the next day, she looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes bloodshot, and her posture defeated. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered everything she had done. I talked to my lawyer. I began setting down the divorce papers I had brought with me. "This is what I'm offering. It's fair, considering the circumstances." She picked up the papers with trembling hands and scanned them. Her face crumpled when she saw the terms. No spousal support, no claim to my savings, and I would keep the house. She would get the car she drove and a small cash settlement. Barely enough to start over, but more than she deserved. "This is cruel," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You can't just leave me with nothing." I leaned forward, my voice cold and firm. "You had everything, and you threw it away. Now you can live with the consequences." She sobbed, but I didn't let it sway me. I handed her a pen. "Sign it, or we can drag this through court, and you'll lose even more." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the paper. Then, with a broken sigh, she signed. But I wasn't done. That night, I sent a final message to her lover. From the burner phone, I wrote, "She's all yours now. Good luck." His reply was exactly what I expected. "She's not my problem anymore." Perfect. I forwarded the message to her. The next morning, I contacted her workplace. Using an anonymous email, I sent them a detailed account of her affair with her work contact. I included screenshots of her messages, ensuring there was no doubt about her behavior. I didn't know if they would act on it, but I wanted her to understand that there were no safe spaces left for her lies. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I started to rebuild my life. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into work, and focused on rediscovering who I was without her. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance as her life fell further apart. Her lover refused to see her. Her job was on shaky ground, and her family grew distant, embarrassed by the scandal. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. She had thought she could lie, cheat, and manipulate without consequence. But now, she knew the truth. I wasn't the clueless husband she had taken me for. I was her reckoning. The days following her signing of the divorce papers were oddly quiet. For years, My life had been tangled with hers. Her laughter, her moods, her lies. Now the silence in the house was deafening, but it was a silence I welcomed. It meant I was free. I moved my things into a temporary rental, a small, unassuming apartment close to work. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every box I unpacked felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming my life. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual friends that her world was collapsing. She had been put on leave at work pending investigation, and her attempts to reconnect with her inner circle had been met with polite indifference at best and outright hostility at worst. No one wanted to be associated with her after what had come to light. But there was one loose end I still needed to address: her family. I met with her parents on a Sunday afternoon. They had been kind to me over the years, almost like second parents. I owed them the truth, even if it was painful. When I arrived at their house, her mother opened the door, her face lined with worry. "Oh dear," she said, ushering me inside. "We've been so worried about you." I sat down and told them everything. The affair, the video, the texts, all of it. Her father sat silently, his face hardening with every word. Her mother, on the other hand, dissolved into tears. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "We raised her better than this." "It's not your fault," I said, trying to reassure her. "This was her choice." Her father finally spoke, his voice gruff. "You're handling this with more dignity than I would have. If there's anything we can do, let us know." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I think it's best if we all move on. I just thought you deserved to hear it from me." As I left their house, I felt a sense of finality. There was no going back now. Not for me, not for her. The next step was to sever the remaining ties that bound us. I changed the passwords on all shared accounts, closed our joint bank account, and blocked her on every platform. I didn't want her to have even the smallest window into my new life. But before I did, I sent her a final message. "I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for. Goodbye." Her response came almost immediately. "Please, can we just talk?" I didn't reply. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work and started going out with friends again. They rallied around me, their support reminding me that I wasn't alone. I even began to entertain the idea of dating again, though I knew it would take time before I was truly ready. The silence she left behind wasn't just emptiness. It was the space I needed to heal, to figure out who I was without her lies weighing me down. For the first time in years, I felt free. And the best part? I knew I had handled things on my terms, with precision and purpose. She had tried to break me, but in the end, it was her world that crumbled. I wasn't done rebuilding, but I was finally at peace. And that was worth everything. Just when I thought the storm had passed, a new wave hit. A week after I sent her the final message, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Out of curiosity, I answered. "Hello, it's me." Her voice came through weak and trembling. I almost hung up but decided against it. Curiosity, and perhaps a hint of pity, got the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked coldly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to say it." Her words felt like daggers. They were too little, too late. "You're right. You don't," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My friends, my job, even my family barely speaks to me. I don't know what to do." For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. This was a woman I had once loved, who had been my partner for years. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the countless nights I spent wondering what went wrong. "That's not my problem anymore," I said, cutting through her self-pity. "You made your choices. Now you live with them." She sobbed, and the sound was almost unbearable. But I didn't let it sway me. "Goodbye," I said, and ended the call. The next few days were surreal. She began reaching out through mutual friends, trying to relay messages to me. Each one was a variation of the same theme. Apologies, regrets, pleas for a second chance. I ignored every single one. I didn't block her out of pettiness, but out of necessity. I needed to move on, and she was a distraction I couldn't afford. Then, an unexpected message came through from one of our mutual friends, Lily. It read, "I think you should see this." Attached was a screenshot of a post my ex-wife had made on social media. In it, she painted herself as the victim, claiming I had blindsided her with the divorce and spread half-truths to ruin her reputation. My blood boiled. It wasn't enough that she had betrayed me. Now she wanted to rewrite history to paint herself in a better light. I knew I could have ignored it, but I also knew that staying silent would allow her narrative to take root. I called Lily and explained everything. I sent her the evidence, the video, the texts, everything I had shared with her during the divorce. "Feel free to share this with anyone who asks," I said. "I'm done staying quiet." The backlash was immediate. Friends who had initially tried to give her the benefit of the doubt turned against her completely. People unfriended her, blocked her, and even confronted her directly online. She tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for my dignity. For the first time, I felt like I was winning, not just against her, but against the part of me that had doubted my strength. I was done being her victim. I was ready to move forward for good. After the social media debacle, the messages stopped. The air around me felt lighter, freer. It was as though she had finally realized there was no path back to me, no way to rewrite the narrative to salvage her reputation. She was defeated, and I was at peace. I spent the following weeks focusing entirely on myself. I went back to the gym, started cooking meals I hadn't made in years, and reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from during the marriage. Every day felt like a small step forward, away from the wreckage of the life I had left behind. One afternoon, I met up with Lily and a few of our mutual friends for drinks. It was the first time I'd been out socially since the divorce drama had erupted. There was something cathartic about being surrounded by people who knew the truth, who had supported me through it all. "To new beginnings," Lily said, raising her glass. "To freedom," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. The group erupted into laughter, and for the first time in months, it wasn't forced. I wasn't pretending to be okay. I genuinely was. Meanwhile, the updates about her life came less and less frequently. From what I gathered, her job had let her go, citing the drama as a distraction that tarnished their image. Her friends had all but abandoned her, and her family had distanced themselves after seeing the truth. The lover she had risked everything for was nowhere to be found. It was poetic in a way. The life she had built on lies had crumbled into nothing, while I was slowly but surely building something better for myself. One day, I found myself staring at the stack of paperwork on my desk. The divorce documents, the screenshots, the evidence that had been my armor throughout this battle. It felt heavy, not just physically but emotionally, as if they were anchors tying me to a chapter one no longer wanted to revisit. I grabbed the entire stack, took it outside, and lit it on fire in the fire pit. As the flames consumed the pages, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about letting go of the pain, the anger, and the bitterness. Watching the ashes scatter in the wind, I made a promise to myself to stop looking back and start focusing on the road ahead. A week later, I went on my first date. It wasn't serious, just coffee with someone a friend had introduced me to, but it felt significant. I wasn't looking for love, not yet, but I was open to the idea of it. Open to the possibility that not all relationships ended in betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. Months passed, and the dust that had swirled so chaotically around my life finally settled. The divorce was finalized, the house was officially mine, and I had crafted a new routine that felt entirely mine. Every morning I woke up to peace. No lies, no suspicion, no tension, just silence that felt like freedom. One evening, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. The version of me from 6 months ago would barely recognize the man I had become. I was stronger, more confident, and unapologetically focused on myself. The anger that had once fueled me had transformed into resolve, a determination to live fully and authentically. I thought about her occasionally, not with longing, but with curiosity. What had she learned from all this? Had she grown? Or was she stuck in the same web of excuses and self-pity? The answer didn't matter. Her life was no longer my concern. One day, as I was out running errands, I bumped into someone unexpected, Lily's cousin Claire. We had met briefly at a party years ago, but I barely remembered her. She was standing in line at the same coffee shop, scrolling through her phone. "Hey," I said, tapping her shoulder lightly. "Claire, right?" She looked up, startled at first, then smiled. "Oh, wow. Yeah, it's been a while. How are you?" We started chatting, catching up on the years since we'd last seen each other. She had a warmth about her, a kindness that felt genuine. Before I left, she slipped her number into my hand. "We should grab a coffee sometime. You know, when we're not both standing in line for it." I smiled and nodded. "I'd like that." Our first coffee date turned into a dinner. Dinner turned into a weekend hike. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was smiling more, laughing more, living more. Claire was different from anyone I'd ever known. Direct but kind, funny but thoughtful. She wasn't filling a void. She was helping me discover a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. As the months turned into a year, I found myself fully healed, no longer defined by the betrayal or the pain it had caused. Claire and I were taking things slow, but it felt real, grounded in trust, respect, and honesty. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly happy. One night, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, Claire turned to me, her head resting on my shoulder. "You've been through a lot," she said softly, "but you don't let it weigh you down. That's rare." I thought about her words for a moment before replying. "It's not about forgetting what happened," I said. "It's about letting it shape you without letting it define you." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "I think it shaped you into someone pretty incredible." For the first time in years, I believed that might be true. The chapter of my marriage was over, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was just the prologue to a life that was finally mine to write. And I couldn't wait to see what came next.